The Council warned Earth, and vanished without a trace. The vessel was already inside our moon's orbit, before any radar station on Earth picked it up. That was the first thing that should have told us everything. I was sitting in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of the UN Interstellar Liaison Building in New York, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, reviewing a stack of communication logs from the Deep Space Monitoring Array in New Mexico. My name is Yael Dror. I had spent 11 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, 4 years in classified joint operations I am still not permitted to name, and the last 6 years sitting in this office, translating the silence of space into reports that nobody in my chain of command actually wanted to read. The job had never felt urgent. It felt urgent now. The vessel was not broadcasting any signal. It was not slowing down in a way that suggested it intended to stop. It was not accelerating in a way that suggested aggression. It was simply moving toward Earth, the way a person walks toward a door they have opened 1,000 times before. Familiar, unhurried, like we were the destination, and they had never doubted it. My phone rang. It was Ambassador Nora Chen, the head of the entire UN Interstellar Division, and my direct superior, and she said 4 words before I could speak. "Conference room, right now." I left the cold coffee on my desk. There were 9 people in the conference room when I arrived, and by the time I sat down there were 14. Screens covered the far wall, all of them showing the same object from different angles, different sensors, different wavelengths. It looked, in the thermal imaging, like a crescent. In radar, it looked like a city block dropped into orbit. In the visual feed from the Mauna Kea telescope, it looked like nothing I had a category for, not a ship the way I understood ships. More like something that had grown into a shape, the way coral grows, slowly and purposefully, and without any interest in what anyone else thinks about the result. Nora stood at the head of the table. She had the face of someone who had not slept, and had made peace with that fact. "It has not hailed us," she said. "It has not shown weapons. It has not responded to any of our 47 contact attempts across every frequency we have on record. It entered lunar orbit 11 minutes ago, and it stopped. It is sitting there, and it is waiting for something. For us to go to it," I said. Everyone looked at me. I pulled out the pen my daughter had given me the previous Christmas. It had a cartoon sun printed on the side. I clicked it once. It came to our doorstep and stopped. That is not what you do if you want to invade someone. That is what you do when you are waiting to be invited in. It wants a meeting. Nora looked at me for a long moment. She had a way of looking at people that felt like she was reading the footnotes underneath their words. "Then we are going to give it one," she said. "Yael, you are the meeting." I clicked the pen again. "I will need a shuttle," I said, "and someone who can actually speak." The linguist they sent with me was a man named Dr. Callum Price. He was 43 years old, had spent his career building algorithmic translation frameworks for non-human signal patterns, and he was, in the 40-minute shuttle ride up to lunar orbit, the most nervous human being I had ever shared a confined space with. His hands did not stop moving. He kept reorganizing his equipment bag. He put his tablet in, took it out, put it in again. I did not say anything about it. I understood it. I just expressed it differently. I clicked my pen. The vessel, up close, was even less like a ship than the cameras had suggested. It had no visible seams, no obvious propulsion system, no windows, no hatches, nothing that looked like an entrance. It was smooth in a way that felt deliberate, like smoothness was an architectural choice rather than a manufacturing outcome. And it was warm. Even through the shuttle's sensors, you could feel it. Not the heat of an engine, something else. Then a section of the hull simply opened. No grinding, no hiss of pressure, no mechanical sequence. One moment it was solid, the next there was a corridor, lit in a pale amber that felt almost biological, almost like sunlight filtered through closed eyelids. Callum said, very quietly, "Oh." I clicked the pen. "Let's go." What was inside, I will not try to describe in full, because I do not think I have the right words, and I am not certain the right words exist in any human language yet. What I will say is that the interior felt larger than the exterior should have allowed, and that the beings who met us at the end of the corridor were not what I expected, and that my first thought, my very first unfiltered thought when I saw them, was, they are tired. Not physically. Something older than that. There were 7 of them, and each one was built around a central structure that I will call a body, for lack of anything better, and each one moved with the kind of careful, deliberate slowness of something that has been doing this for a very long time, and has stopped finding it exciting. The one who spoke first had a voice that came through a translation device attached to the exterior of what I assumed was its torso. The device turned its sounds into English with a half-second delay, and the voice it produced was low and even, and utterly without inflection. It said, "We are the Galactic Council. We have been observing your civilization for 60 of your years. We have come because you have reached a threshold, and we have come to warn you." Callum's hand found my arm. I let him hold it. "Warn us about what?" I said. The translation device hummed. A pause longer than the half-second lag would explain. "About what you will find," it said, "if you go further." I looked at the 7 of them. They were watching me with whatever served them for eyes, and I felt, in the base of my stomach, the same feeling I had felt 11 years ago, in a desert I am not permitted to name, the feeling of a room where everyone already knows the ending except you. I clicked my pen. "Tell me everything," I said. They told us for 4 hours. When we came back to Earth, I sat in the debrief room and answered every question, and filed every report, and said all the right things, in all the right order. And then I went to my office, sat down at my desk, and looked at the cold coffee that was still sitting exactly where I had left it. They had told us about 47 civilizations, gone, over 600,000 years. All of them had reached a specific point in their technological development. All of them had been found. All of them had stopped transmitting. They had told us that if Earth continued developing faster than light travel, we would be next. They had told us the thing that found them was patient and ancient and had never once failed. What they had not told us was how they had survived. I picked up the cold coffee. I put it back down. There was something wrong with the story. I could feel it the way you feel a stone in your shoe, not painful enough to stop you, but present every single step. The Council had survived. 32 species, all of them sitting in that vessel looking tired and careful and controlled. 32 species that had apparently met the same thing that destroyed 47 others and had somehow come out the other side. They had not told us how. They had told us to stop. They had not told us how they kept going. I clicked the pen once more. The next morning, I requested the full Council archive, every record of their species, their histories, their founding, and I started reading. Not for what was there. I had learned a long time ago that the most important information is almost never in what people say. I was looking for what they had left out. On the 3rd page of the founding records, I found the first piece of it. A species called the Uri, listed in the Council's own historical documents as a founding member, one of the original 32. 40,000 years of recorded history, one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the known galaxy, not listed as destroyed, not listed as lost, listed as dissolved, by mutual agreement. I read that line 4 times. Then I opened a new document and started a list. And the list, over the next 6 hours, grew longer than I wanted it to be. The Council had come to warn us, but somewhere under the warning, something else was buried. I just had not found it yet. The Council requested a second meeting for 72 hours later. They came back in 61. That was the first wrong thing. There were 31 species. I noticed before anyone else in the room did. I had memorized the delegation. Every form, every configuration, every translator device. 32, now 31. One missing, and no one had mentioned it, and no one on the Council side showed any sign of being about to mention it. I clicked my pen under the table where no one could see, and I said nothing. Because I had learned, in 11 years of work that no one wanted to read reports about, that the moment you show someone you have noticed what they are hiding, they stop showing you anything at all. So I let them talk. And I kept counting. The second meeting was supposed to be about evidence. They delivered it in a package that filled 3 hard drives and took our systems 6 hours to index. 47 civilizations, each one documented with a level of detail that made my head hurt and my stomach turn. Star maps, biological records, the last transmissions, the silence that came after. All of it organized with the kind of precision that only comes from very old institutions that have had a great deal of time to get their filing systems in order. I spent the first night going through it, the way my first instructor had taught me to go through any intelligence package, not looking for what confirmed the story I had been told, looking for the edges where the story did not quite fit. There were more edges than I expected. I kept a separate document, private, encrypted to a key that only existed in my head. I listed everything that felt slightly wrong, slightly off, slightly too neat, or slightly too vague. By 3 in the morning, I had 11 items on the list. By 5, I had 19. The most important one was this. Of the 47 civilizations the Council listed as destroyed, 22 of them had been destroyed before they achieved faster-than-light travel. The threat profile did not fit. The Council had told us the danger was triggered by FTL development. Something finds you when you reach that threshold. Something wakes up and turns in your direction. That was the mechanism. That was the reason we had to stop. But 22 of the 47 had never reached it. I stared at that number for a long time. My coffee made a ring on the page. A perfect oval. I moved the cup slightly, and made another ring, slightly overlapping. I kept doing it without meaning to. Small overlapping circles across the most important document anyone had ever given me, while the number 22 sat there and refused to mean what the Council needed it to mean. Ambassador Chen was presenting to the Security Council that morning. 14 heads of state, half of them remote, one of them with a connection that kept freezing at critical moments, in a way that felt less technical and more political. Everyone was taking it very seriously in the very specific way that powerful people take things seriously when cameras might be watching, which is to say they were performing seriousness rather than actually being serious. I sat in the back and counted my coffee rings and thought about the 22. After the briefing, I cornered the lead council translator, a small, quiet alien who went by the designation Sarah 4, and who had, over the 2 meetings, developed a habit of watching me more than the other humans in the room. I had noticed. I had said nothing about it. "I have a question," I said. "That is not on the official agenda." Sarah 4's translation device gave its half-second hum. "You have many questions that are not on the official agenda, Commander Dror. Of the 47 civilizations in your documentation," I said, keeping my voice level and quiet, 22 of them were destroyed before FTL development. Your spokesperson told us the threat is triggered by FTL. How do you explain the 22? The half-second delay stretched to 3 seconds. "The documentation is comprehensive," Sarah 4 said. "All relevant context is included." That is not an answer. It is the answer that has been prepared for this question. I looked at it. It looked back at me with whatever it used to look, and in that gap between what it said and what it almost said, I felt the shape of something very large that was being very carefully kept just out of sight. I clicked my pen once and walked away. That afternoon, the full council delegation went back to their vessel and said they would return the following morning for the 3rd meeting. I used the night well. I pulled every historical record I could access. Council founding documents, interspecies treaty archives, trade route histories, the kind of bureaucratic background material that nobody ever reads because it is dry and detailed and about civilizations most humans had not known existed until 6 weeks ago. The URI kept appearing. Dissolved, by mutual agreement, the phrase used 3 times across 3 different documents, always in the same flat, administrative language, always without elaboration. I cross-referenced the URI dissolution date against the Council's own timeline of the threat. The URI dissolved 17 years after first contact with the Council, 17 years after being told about the danger, 17 years after being told to stop. I opened the species file on the URI. 40,000 years of recorded history, yes. A spacefaring civilization with a reach that covered 6 star systems. A culture built around what their records called the long view, the philosophical framework of making decisions across centuries rather than decades. These were not a people who dissolved easily. These were not a people who agreed without reason. Something had convinced them, or something had been done to them, and the Council had smoothed it into 3 words, mutual agreement, and filed it, and moved on. I made a list of all the species that had been Council members and were no longer listed as current members. The list had 13 entries. 13 species, gone from the Council, all described in some variation of the same administrative language. Dissolved. Withdrew, integrated, transitioned. 13 species that had presumably been told the same thing we were being told, and were no longer around to confirm or deny it. I sat with that for a long time. The 3rd meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. At 8:57, the Council vessel departed lunar orbit without any prior communication. All 31 remaining species. At the same time. To the minute. My phone was ringing before the sensor alert even finished its cycle. I let it ring. I was already at the window, looking up at a sky that looked the same as it always did, and thinking about 13 species described in administrative language, and thinking about 22 civilizations destroyed before they ever got loud enough for anything to find them, and thinking about the question I had been not quite asking for 3 days. If the thing the Council feared was something that hunted species who became too visible, too advanced, too loud, then the Council's solution was to make everyone smaller and quieter. And if you were already the biggest, quietest thing in the galaxy, and you had the authority to tell every other species what they were and were not allowed to become, that was not protection. That was management. I picked up my phone. It was Chen. "They're gone," she said. "I know. All of them. I know." Yael. A pause, the kind that precedes something she does not want to say. Were we wrong to trust them? I thought about the 22. I thought about the Uri. I thought about 13 entries described in 3 words each. "We were not wrong to listen," I said. "We were wrong to assume the warning and the truth were the same thing." I hung up. I booked the next flight to Saskatchewan, because there was someone I needed to talk to, and he was sitting on something he should have told someone a long time ago. The facility in Saskatchewan had no official name on any public record. The staff called it the box. It was buried under 40 meters of Canadian prairie, accessed by an elevator that took 4 minutes to descend, and smelled permanently of machine oil and takeaway food. It had been operational for 3 years. Its budget was classified at a level above the conversations I was cleared for, which told me the people authorizing it had decided it was worth hiding from the people who were supposed to be informed. I was informed now. Dr. Callum Price, who had been my translator on the initial contact mission, had given me a name before I left New York. He had given it to me quietly, in a corridor, without making eye contact, in the tone of someone discharging a debt. The name was Owen Hart. Owen Hart was 38 years old. He had published 4 papers in theoretical physics before his name disappeared from every academic database in which it had appeared. Not deleted. Just gone quiet. The way things go quiet when someone moves them somewhere they are not supposed to be found. He was waiting for me at the bottom of the elevator, with a cup of coffee in each hand, and the expression of someone who had known I was coming before I had decided to come. He handed me a cup. It was the right temperature. I did not ask how he knew. "You read the package," he said. "Yes." "And you found the 22? "Yes." He turned and walked down the corridor. I followed. The corridor was long and white, and lit with the particular institutional light that makes every hour feel like 3 in the afternoon. There were 47 scientists working in the facility, based on the personnel board near the elevator. Most of them were in rooms we passed without stopping. People working at screens. People running calibrations on equipment I did not have names for. People arguing about something involving a whiteboard covered in notation that looked, to me, like organized noise. Owen did not stop at any of these rooms. He stopped at a door at the end of the corridor that had no label. He pressed his palm to the reader. The door opened. Inside was a room that stopped me before I even crossed the threshold. Every surface was covered in his handwriting. Not notes, not diagrams in the conventional sense. Something denser than that. Layer upon layer of writing. Old layers showing through in blue and black and red. New layers over the top in green. The whole room a 3-year record of one person's thinking. The ceiling, the floor, even the chair. One chair. No desk. A single terminal in the corner, with a screensaver cycling through what I recognized as deep space signal patterns. "Sit," he said. I sat in the one chair, which had equations written across the seat in permanent marker. Owen stayed standing, his back to me, one hand moving slowly across the wall, touching his own writing, rearranging nothing. "The signal," he said. "The thing the Council calls the hunter. They described it as a thing that finds you when you become loud enough. When your FTL development reaches a certain threshold, you start broadcasting a signature it can detect. And it comes." "Yes," I said. "That is not what the signal is." I did not say anything. I had learned that people who have been sitting on large truths in small rooms need a moment to find the right place to begin. "FTL travel does not create a signal that attracts a predator," Owen said. "What it creates is a signal that becomes visible to something that has always been looking. There is a difference. A predator waits for prey. What is out there is not waiting for prey." He turned around. "It is looking for something specific, something it wants to find. And every civilization that develops FTL eventually generates the exact signature it is searching for. What is it searching for? I said. He touched the wall again. A single equation in green ink, the newest layer, written over older writing that showed through underneath like ghost text. Us, he said. All of us. Every civilization that gets loud enough, it is not a destroyer, it is a finder. It finds civilizations that have reached a threshold, and it makes contact, and it connects them to something larger than the Council ever wanted them to be connected to. The room was very quiet. The signal patterns cycled on the screen. The 47 civilizations, I said. The ones the Council says were destroyed. Were not destroyed, Owen said. They were contacted, and after contact they went quiet. Yes, but not because they were gone, because they were somewhere else, in communication with something the Council cannot control, and cannot monitor, and cannot manage. I put my cup down on the floor because there was nowhere else to put it, and the Council knew this. The Council has always known this. They were contacted too, 600,000 years ago, and they made a decision. They decided that being the largest known civilization in a managed galaxy was preferable to being one voice among many in something much larger. So they modified their FTL signature to make themselves invisible to the finder, and then they positioned themselves as the protectors of every new civilization they encountered, warning them away from FTL development, keeping them small, keeping them quiet, keeping themselves in the position of being the only ones who knew the shape of the full picture. I sat very still. Outside the door, 47 scientists worked on their calibrations and their whiteboards and their takeaway food. How long have you known this? I said. Owen's hand stopped moving on the wall. 2 years, he said. I breathed in. I breathed out. And you told no one. I told no one, he agreed. Because I needed to be certain, and because I was not sure what would happen to this facility if I said it out loud before I was ready. I looked at him. He looked at the wall. Are you ready now? I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the terminal in the corner and typed a command I could not see from where I was sitting. The screensaver disappeared. A single waveform replaced it. Steady, patient, repeating. We have been running low-power FTL test pulses for 7 months, he said. Calibration runs, standard procedure. But they generate the signature, a small version of it, but real. You have been broadcasting, I said. Yes. For 7 months. Yes. I looked at the waveform on the screen. It pulsed, regular as a heartbeat. Then something has been listening for 7 months, I said. Owen said nothing for a long time. Then, yes. And the room was very quiet again. The Council had vanished the following Tuesday. All 22 remaining species, simultaneously, without warning. I was not surprised. I thought they had decided we were no longer manageable. I thought they had simply left, the way a gardener leaves, when the garden decides it does not want to be a garden anymore. I was not entirely right about that, but I was not entirely wrong either. Owen and I spent the next 3 days in the box, and then we went back to New York with what we had, and I sat across from Nora Chen and I told her everything. Not the version that was easy to hear, the full version, the 22 civilizations, the Uri, the 13 disappeared Council species, the signal that was not a threat but a lighthouse, the finder that was not a destroyer but a connector, the Council that had spent 600,000 years making sure no one else ever got to make the choice they had made. Nora was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "What do we do?" I put my hand in my coat pocket. The pen was there. I pulled it out. "We get loud," I said. The vessel appeared on a Wednesday morning. Not from the direction anyone expected. Not from deep space. Not from the outer system. Not from any of the 43 trajectories our tracking arrays had been monitoring since the Council went silent. It came from the direction of the sun. That detail alone sent every astronomer at every monitoring station into a state that was difficult to describe professionally. Our sun had no facility for concealing a vessel of that mass. There was no explanation for how it had been there, close to the sun's corona, without our instruments detecting it. And yet there were no traces of entry from any other direction. It had simply always been there, or it had arrived through a method that did not interact with any system we had built to notice things arriving. It was larger than the Council vessel. Much larger. I had spent 20 years in spaces where large things moved, and I had developed a fairly stable sense of scale. This defeated that sense. It was not large the way a building is large or a ship is large. It was large the way a mountain range is large, beyond the point where you compare it to other things and simply accept it as a category of its own. It did not move toward Earth. It stopped at a distance of roughly 2 million kilometers, and it stayed there. No signal, no hail, no response to any of our transmissions. For 6 hours it just sat there. I spent those 6 hours in a room I had commandeered in the monitoring facility in New Mexico, with Owen on a secure line from Saskatchewan and Nora on another line from New York, and approximately 40 government officials cycling in and out of the room, wanting to know what we were going to do and whether they could quote me on anything. I told them nothing they could quote. I sat at the terminal, and I watched the vessel on the feed from the solar telescope array, and I thought about what Owen had said. Not a predator, a finder, something that had been looking for a specific signature for a very long time. We had been generating that signature for 7 months. It was not here because we were a threat. It was not here because it was angry. It was here because we had, finally, after however long it had been looking, generated a signal clear enough and strong enough and loud enough to be unmistakable. We had been found. At hour 6, Owen called me directly. Not on the official line, his personal number. That alone told me something. "I need you to look at the secondary feed," he said, "the one running the spectral analysis." I pulled it up on the screen beside the main visual. The vessel was transmitting, not on any frequency we had been monitoring. Something narrower, more precise, the kind of precision that does not come from someone trying to communicate with everyone. It came from someone trying to communicate with one specific person. "Where is it directed?" I said. Owen was quiet for 2 seconds. "Your terminal," he said. "My terminal. Not the UN communications array. Not the global broadcast system. Not the military emergency network. Not any of the infrastructure that had been set up specifically to handle first contact scenarios and had cost member states approximately $900 billion across 12 years of joint development. My terminal. I had been sitting at it for 6 hours. I put my hand in my coat pocket and found the pen. My daughter had taped it back together after I cracked it in my pocket during the long week of the council disappearance. She had used yellow electrical tape and written on the tape in her handwriting, small and careful, "Do not lose this one, Mum." I held it without clicking it. The transmission was on my screen now. Owen had routed it through while I was thinking. It was not in any language our systems recognized. It was not in any language our systems had been designed to recognize. It was a pattern, repeating, with variations. Each variation slightly different from the last, each one building on the previous one, the way a conversation builds, the way a sentence adds to the one before it. It was asking something. I could not read it, but I could feel the shape of it, the way you feel the shape of a question in a voice even when you do not understand the language. It had found us, and now it wanted to know if we were ready to respond. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Owen, on the line, said nothing. Nora, on the other line, said nothing. I clicked the pen once. Then I typed a single line into the terminal, not in code, not in any formal contact protocol, not in anything the 12-year $900 billion first contact infrastructure would have approved. I typed it in plain English, and I hit send before I could think of a reason not to. "We hear you. We are here. Tell us what you found." The response came back in 40 seconds. 40 seconds is the speed of light delay for 2 million kilometers. It had responded the instant it received my message. No hesitation, no consultation. It had been waiting for exactly this. The response was not in the pattern it had been using. The response was in English. Imperfect English. Slightly formal, slightly stiff. The English of someone who has learned a language from records rather than from speaking it. But English. "We have been looking for you for a very long time," it said. "We could not find you until you became loud. The ones who warned you had kept you quiet. We are glad you decided to become loud anyway." I read it twice. Owen said, on the line, very quietly, "There it is." The next 4 hours were the most complicated of my professional life. I will not detail every political conversation, every military briefing, every argument I had with people who outranked me about whether I had the authority to have opened that conversation without a committee review. I will say that at the end of it, Nora Chen stood in front of me with her arms folded and her face very still, and said, "You had no authorization for that." "No," I agreed. You acted alone on a contact scenario with an unknown entity of unknown capabilities and unknown intent, without a committee review, without legal clearance, without even notifying the Security Council. Yes. And it responded. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. What did it say in the next exchange? She said. I handed her the transcript. She read it. Her expression did not change. Exactly. But something behind it shifted. The way the light shifts when a cloud moves. Not dramatic, just different. There are 412 of them, she said, reading from the page. Yes, I said. She looked up. Species like us, she said. Species that got loud enough to be found, I said. Species the Council had been keeping quiet. 412 civilizations that had been alone, that had been told to be afraid, and to be small, and to stop growing in the direction of something the Council did not want them to reach. She put the transcript down on the table between us. And now they are not alone, she said. And now they are not alone, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then she picked up her own pen from the table and clicked it once. It was a reflex. She probably did not even notice she did it. I am going to have to explain this to 14 heads of state, she said. I know. They are not going to enjoy the explanation. No, I said, but they are going to enjoy what comes after. The press briefing was on a Monday. I was not at the press briefing. Nora handled it, which was the right call. She was better at the formal version of things. She had the face for cameras, the cadence for large rooms, the ability to translate something enormous into language that did not make people feel the full weight of it all at once. That was a skill. I did not have it. I had other skills. I was in a small room with a single terminal and a bad chair and a translation framework that Owen had been building for 3 months, ever since the first response came back in imperfect English. The framework was still imperfect. The entity on the other end of the line seemed to understand this and had adapted, which told me more about its patience and its intelligence than any technical specification could have. I had been talking to it almost every day for 4 months. I say talking. What I mean is that I sat at the terminal and typed and waited 40 seconds for a response, and read it, and typed again, and over 4 months, those exchanges had built into something I did not have a clean word for. Not friendship, not alliance, not yet. Something earlier than either of those. The stage where two people have said enough true things to each other to start trusting that the next true thing will also be received honestly. I had learned things. I had learned that the entity, I could not say its name, not yet, not without a sensory range I would apparently need several decades to develop, had been moving through this region of the galaxy for approximately 200,000 years, looking, not aggressively, systematically. The way you search a very large house for something you know is in there somewhere, moving room to room without hurrying, certain of eventually finding what you are looking for. What it was looking for was us, all of us. Every civilization that reached the threshold, every species that got loud enough to hear. I had learned that the Council's decision, 600,000 years ago, had been made by a much smaller group than the Council itself knew. 3 species, not 32, had made the choice to suppress. The other 29 had been told a version of the truth that made compliance feel like protection. They had believed they were keeping younger civilizations safe. Most of them had believed it genuinely, and had done what genuinely believing people do, which is pass the belief along with the conviction that makes it self-reinforcing. I had learned that the 13 species that had left the Council, described in administrative language as dissolved, or integrated, or transitioned, had been contacted through methods the Council could not monitor, had learned the truth, had made the choice the Council feared most, which was simply to stop cooperating. I had learned that the 412 were not a single unified block. They were 412 separate civilizations, each with their own histories and conflicts and ways of seeing, now connected through a network that the entity had been building for longer than our species had existed. The network was not a government. It was not an alliance in the military sense. It was closer to what Owen called, in one of our late-night calls from Saskatchewan, an enormous group conversation that has been going on for a very long time and has room for more voices. I had learned that our signal, Owen's test pulses, 7 months of them, low power and imprecise, had been the loudest thing to come from our region of space in 40 years. 40 years of human radio silence that the Council had not caused but had certainly been happy to take advantage of. And then Owen's pulses, and then contact, and now this. I had learned that it had learned English from our broadcasts. Not all of our broadcasts. Specifically, the recordings my daughter had made for a school project 2 years ago, posted publicly online, in which she had interviewed me about my work, and I had talked for 40 minutes about silence and listening, and the specific kind of patience that comes from spending years waiting for something to answer. My daughter had titled the video, "My Mum the Space Listener," and it had received approximately 217 views before the entity found it, somewhere in the enormous archive of human broadcasting that bleeds into space at the speed of light, and decided it was a useful place to start. I had not told my daughter this yet. I was still finding the right moment. At the terminal, I typed, "The briefing is happening now. Most people on Earth are watching it." 40 seconds. "Are you watching it?" "No," I typed. "I am here." 40 seconds. "You prefer doing things to watching things being done." "Yes," I typed. 40 seconds. "We have noticed this about your species." I smiled. I was not sure it could detect that, but I smiled anyway. "What else have you noticed?" I typed. This response took longer than 40 seconds. Significantly longer. I waited. Outside the small room, in the larger facility, I could hear the sound of the press briefing playing on someone's screen. Nora's voice, calm and measured, telling the world something that was going to change everything about how the world understood itself. The response came. "You ask about others before you ask about yourselves." In every first exchange, across every civilization we have found, there is a pattern. Some ask first, "Are you dangerous?" Some ask first, "What do you want?" Some ask first, "How do we protect ourselves?" These are all reasonable questions. These are all the questions of people who have learned that the world has edges, and those edges can hurt you. I read it slowly. Your species asked first, "How many of us are there?" I put the pen down on the table. I looked at the screen. Not, "Are you dangerous?" Not, "What do you want?" How many of us are there? This is the question of a species that has never, in all its history, believed it was alone and was simply waiting for confirmation. This is the question of a species that has been lonely, on a scale it could not fully name, and wanted, more than safety and more than power, to know it had company. I read it 3 times. The press briefing was still playing outside. Nora's voice, steady and clear. 14 heads of state on 14 screens. The world listening. "We have found 412 civilizations that reached the threshold," the response continued. "In all of that time, across all of that distance, your species is only the 3rd one to ask that question first." I was quiet for a moment. Then I picked up the pen, clicked it once, typed, "What happened to the other 2? 40 seconds. "They are here," it said. "They have been waiting. They wanted to be the ones to say hello." And then the terminal showed something I had not seen in 4 months of conversation. A second signal, layered beneath the first. And then a third. And then, one by one, 4 more, each one arriving from a different direction, each one at the speed of light from a different point in the sky, converging on my small room, with its bad chair, and its one terminal, and the pen my daughter had fixed with yellow electrical tape. 7 voices. Then 12. Then more. All of them saying, in languages the framework was still learning to translate, some version of the same thing. "We are here. We found you. We have been waiting for you to find us back." I sat with it for a long moment, long enough for the world outside the door to keep changing without me, which it was going to do regardless. Then I straightened in the bad chair, clicked the pen, once, deliberate, and I started writing back. Not to one of them, to all of them. 412 civilizations that had been alone, that had been told to be small and quiet, and afraid of the dark between the stars. That had been managed and contained and kept from the conversation that was always, always happening just outside the range they were allowed to reach. Not anymore. I typed the first line of what was going to be a very long conversation. "We are Earth. We are loud, and we are stubborn, and we are very glad to meet you. Tell us about yourselves." The responses started coming back 40 seconds later. They did not stop for a very long time.